Today on Fintech Frontiers, we're thrilled to welcome Casey Hingtgen, a seasoned technology and operations leader who's redefining renter finances as COO at Whale, where he's building the industry's first high-yield rental deposit account that works for both renters and landlords. From scaling Wayfair's international and B2B ecosystems to driving innovation across supply chain and e-commerce at Evo, Casey has led the transformations at scale, often from zero to massive impact. His deep experience in product, technology, and operational strategy makes him uniquely equipped to tackle some of the thorniest challenges in fintech and proptech. Get ready for a fascinating conversation with Casey about how he's unlocking the financial upside of overlooked spaces, scaling with purpose, and why now is the perfect time to rethink the everyday deposits that we've taken for granted. Let's dive in.
Thanks,
Welcome,
Stephen.
Casey.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So, Casey, what I wanted to ask you was, what is the big problem in the market that you have spotted and that you've engaged on here with Whale?
Yeah, great question. So, what really stood out to us as we were, looking into this opportunity was just how old school a lot of the processes were that landlords were following to collect, hold, and return security deposits. So security deposits are a heavily regulated aspect of the renting process, and for good reason. I think a lot of landlords in the early days were mishandling the funds. Sometimes they would take them and spend them and not be able to return them to the renter. And so the state stepped in and implemented a lot of regulation to help protect renters. The problem is that technology didn't keep up with all of those rules, and so just kept increasing the burden on the landlords for how they had to handle this. At the end of the day, this money is the renters. It's the renters' money. They're kind of putting it aside as a guarantee that they'll take good care of the unit, they'll pay their rent, they'll pay the utilities, and so on. And so Whale had kind of the innovative idea to kind of flip the paradigm. So rather than the renter hand that money over to the landlord, and the landlord have to jump through all these hoops, collect the check, go to the bank, open an escrow account, follow all the rules and regulations for notifying the resident. And then when it comes time to move out, do the reverse process, collect the forwarding address of the resident, do the deductions, print a check, mail the check. We've talked to one landlord that spends over $1 million on their FedEx bill, just mailing deposits back to renters. Right. It's crazy. And you think about, we're in 2025 and we're still mailing things back and forth. How have we not digitized and automated this process? And that's really where Whale stepped in to build that solution. And so, like I said, we flipped the paradigm. So the renter never hands the money over to the landlord with Whale. Wow. So what we've created is a high yield savings account that has a part of it that can be locked for the duration of the lease. And that part is controlled by the landlord. It gets to say when it's released and how much of it is released, just like they do today. But instead of the money going to the landlord first and returning all of it back, in most cases, the renter holds it, the portion's locked. The landlord tells us how much to deduct at the end during their normal move-out process. And then that money is wired to the landlord's operating bank account, directly deducted, and then the renter's money is instantly unlocked in their account. So they don't have to wait for a check. That's the beauty of it. Yeah.
And that sounds like it's a kind of win-win for both parties, the landlord and the renter, because it's reducing the administrative burden on the landlord, which is always welcome, and that the tenant actually gets to hold on to their money and earn interest on it.
Yeah.
That sounds like a win-win.
That's exactly right. And we're finding that renters and landlords both love it. The renter, like you said, earns interest in a high yield savings account. So they're earning return on that. They're, for some people, this might be their first kind of opportunity outside of their home they grew up in. And so they're learning kind of the fundamentals of investing. Whale really wants to become the trusted financial partner for renters. We can kind of talk a little bit about some of the products we see coming down the line, maybe a little bit later. Renters get to earn that return. They have full visibility into their money. Normally they hand that money over. A lot of times, they forget about it. They don't get it back. It's not top of mind for them. There's no way for them to check on, wait, is my money safe? What's going on with it? And then, like I said, they get that instant return. Times renters are waiting weeks to get their money back, which makes it hard if they're trying to move into a new apartment and pay that security deposit. It kind of has a little bit of a cash flow crunch for them. And so this helps them get their money back faster. So they're loving all of those aspects of the product. And then, like you said, landlords, no more collecting the money, chasing residents down, no more complying with all the holding regulations that states impose, paying the interest. A lot of times landlords are paying that out of pocket because their bank didn't provide them with interest. So they're paying that out of their kind of
Yeah.
operating budget. And then, of course, all the hassle, mailing checks back, was just a nightmare, especially for landlords operating at scale with, thousands, tens of thousands of units. And so we're seeing a lot of excitement in the market. Whale actually just won a Shark Tank type competition at one of
Brilliant.
your real estate conferences down in Orlando just yesterday, actually.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah,
That's
so it's starting
excellent.
to get known and heard more across the industry.
We'll share a link to that in the show notes for sure.
Great.
But that is brilliant, and I can see that you've done a lot of innovation here, which is going to make the market, I would say, more attractive for the landlords because they can go about their business with less hassle. One thing I'm wondering about at this stage is I can see how this is attractive for the landlords and for the renters. Tell me, what is Whale's business model
Yeah.
in all of this?
Yeah, great question. Like a traditional bank, right, earning a little bit of spread on the interest that's earned. That's kind of Whale's model. Again, passing most of that on to the renter, but we keep a portion as a registered investment advisor with the SEC, to operate. And so the Whale deposit product is really kind of the first piece that we're building. It's kind of our wedge really into the ecosystem, right? And solving a problem that's really painful. But there's lots of other challenges for both renters and landlords that Whale is really excited to go after. And we see lots of additional revenue streams coming from those additional products that we can offer on both sides as well.
Great. And so you have had to get an SEC license as a registered deposit holder.
Yeah, and that was probably the most challenging thing that we've had to do, but it was
I
super
can
important
imagine.
in terms of
Yes.
building the trust and credibility. And it was a key part of ensuring that we were legally compliant with how we were holding those funds. So we could take custody of those funds on behalf of the renter and the landlord and control that relationship between the two. And so it was a ton of work, ton of legal bills, really expensive.
Yeah.
Now as part of our competitive moat, we're glad to be on the other side of it.
Great. And without giving away too much of your competitive moat, would you have any words of advice for other fintech founders whose business model might require that they get some kind of license from a body such as the SEC?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say, start early. It's a long process and it takes a while. It's expensive. Make sure you have the funding in place to keep you afloat while you're waiting for that to come through, because that's going to be your biggest blocker to getting the product to the market beyond building the product itself. And so I think getting ahead
Yeah.
of it is probably the best advice I'd share.
Get ahead of it. Good advice. Yeah, have the resources. And when you say a long time, do you mind if I push you on that?
Yeah.
How long was the process in your case?
It was about, I think, just a little over a year from kind of start to finish. And that was after kind of we had done some due diligence on the kind of legal regulations to understand, is this actually complying with all the different laws, right? You think, we got 50 states, the District of Columbia, different, cities having their own ordinances as well in terms of the deposits. So we did a ton of research to make sure that the way we were building this product and the way it would be set up and structured would comply with all those regulations.
Fantastic. Well done. So you've got a license, you've got a product. We'll actually circle back on the innovation side a little bit later. Can you tell me what your route to market is then? Is it a B2C or is it a B2B to C, or how do you position yourselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're really focused on the property managers right now. They're the ones that really dictate how the deposits will be held at the property. And so we have to get them on board and excited and comfortable with kind of Whale's innovative approach to this, because it's really creating a whole new category of how deposits are handled in the industry. The traditional cash method was around for forever, thousands of years. And about a decade ago, these kind of insurance alternatives came along that were offering the ability for renters to pay a monthly fee, so they didn't have to pay that upfront deposit. And that's great for people who really can't afford the deposit. But what ends up happening is those people typically end up paying the full deposit fees over the course of their lease. And then by the time they move out, they're still responsible for all the damage. So they're buying insurance with zero coverage for just the privilege of not paying the deposit up front. And so, it works well for people who are really struggling and can't meet that deposit demand up front so they can get into their home. But it's expensive and not super favorable for the for the renter. And then on the flip side, the landlords have to leave their property management system and go file a claim. And so, the adoption's been, relatively low on most properties that are offering this. And so Whale saw a big opportunity to still solve that traditional cash deposit problem. And so, the key for us is getting landlords comfortable with this kind of new methodology of handling it, that's replacing that existing one. And, again, we're seeing a lot of excitement, but it takes a little bit of time for the word to spread. I hope that eventually renters become accustomed to this, and they expect to earn interest on their security deposits. And so hopefully they start to advocate their new landlords. And we've seen this a little bit. We have some customers that have left, go to a new landlord, like, well, wait, hold on. Now I want to keep earning interest on that money. And you talk about
Yes.
deposits in New York City that are $8,000-$10,000 deposits. That's hundreds of dollars a year that they're missing out on. And so we hope that it'll start to be more B2C driven eventually, but we're really focused on the property management customers for now.
Yeah, wow. I would imagine that word of mouth then must be a fairly potent method, as you say, that the renters do this, they like it, and then they're putting pressure on their next landlord to do something similar, and maybe
Right.
that the landlord hasn't heard of it, looks at it and says, that looks useful.
Right.
So
And
you're
that's
seeing
why
that kind of dynamic?
yeah, and that's why we've invested so much in making the onboarding experience incredibly easy for landlords. I think that a
Yes.
lot of people in Proptech talk about, their process being easy, but they're still sending PDFs and Word docs back and forth with instructions. We have you can get started entirely on our website, start to finish, connect your API, fill out some settings, and you can be up and running in 5-10 minutes at your property. And so, what we'll start to see is renters go from property to property with their Whale deposit, because once they open the account once, it's there. And so another landlord could, take the custody of those funds that are already in their account and lock that down if those funds are available. So they never have to then pull money in and out and send them to all the different accounts. Their Whale account can travel with them as they go from property to property. And so that's really kind of where we see the Whale deposit product evolving in the future as we scale.
Great. And so there's obviously the renter has got access to their portal where there is a deposit account in there, and it's a registered one. It's got FDIC coverage, all of that.
Yep. FDIC insured up to $1 million. They log in just like they would any other bank account. They can see their funds. The kind of difference from kind of your traditional banking accounts, they'll kind of see an overall account value number, but then they'll see an unlocked bucket and a locked bucket. And the locked bucket is what's a part of either one or multiple security deposits that are guaranteed to the landlord, and they can't access that until it's released. The unlocked bucket works just like a typical high yield savings account where they can add money, take money out, transfer to any other bank account. We use Plaid as our bank API partner to form connections and do ACH transfers. But that's the kind of special magic of it, is having those kind of two different aspects of that overarching account.
Are you seeing this as an opportunity, say that the renter has got a motive to place the deposit in that account, and so that they can take advantage of having access to interest on their deposit while renting, but then that you're saying, hey, that's a good place to start.
Yeah,
So
why not add a
not
little
that
bit
many
more?
fintechs have got deposits, right?
Right, right. And, we encourage them, with things like, you could round up your rent, paying $17.75. Why not put an extra $25 in your savings account to start to build that nest egg? And that's
Yeah.
kind of where, the next product that we'll launch down the line, hopefully later this year, is a product called Whale Grow. And that's offering the ability to kind of allow them to invest also in kind of a investment fund, doing some sort of kind of Vanguard ETF fund, just allow them to earn a slightly higher return on that money as
Yeah.
well. Obviously, the money
So,
that's locked for the landlord has to stay held in cash because that has to be fully guaranteed. We can't take principal risk on that. But
yes.
everything else, they could say, great, let's put a little bit more in the market. Not a bad time to invest right now with the US market having cratered. It could be a good opportunity.
Cash is hot these days.
Yep, yep.
But now I'm just talking as I'm thinking here. So I know that in the open market, like banks take deposits and they can use that to fund their lending activities. Now, most of the fintechs that are involved in tech-enabled lending have to go and not only go on the funding journey with VCs or angels or whatever, but that they also have to go and get private credit funding, um, for loans that they can lend out. And that was fine when interest rates were low. As they have ratcheted up, the cost of those funds has increased. It has put pressure on those fintechs because as the cost of funds go up, the total and the consumer behavior has changed. So I'm just wondering if, down the line for Whale, is there an opportunity other that the flip side of deposit portfolio could be a lending portfolio?
I mean, that's really interesting. I think we're so focused right now on the deposit side, and I think that for us, it's so important that money is fully secured and held in cash. I don't think that we would want to get in the business of lending that out. It just exposes us to, I think, a bunch of challenges. And I think one of the key value props that we offer landlords is guaranteeing those funds. They're FDIC insured up to $1 million. Haven't seen an
Yes,
account up to that amount yet, but it's
I'd love to
pretty
see that
scary.
apartment.
Yeah, right. It'd be one hell of a unit. So that's really important to us. So I really don't
Yes.
see us lending. Where I do see us potentially stepping in at some point is making it a little bit easier for renters to pay that deposit up front instead of having a monthly fee. Can we do some sort of agreement where they pay in installments over time, so we can still guarantee that money to the landlord, but we're really loaning it to the renter to then pay that deposit. So that's where I kind of see it, not really extending loans on behalf of the
Yes.
deposit principal that we hold.
Great. Okay. Then you spoke about landlords, but you also spoke about managing agents. Is is there a difference there as far as you're concerned? Or, like, are you going out to small landlords, large landlords? Or I know sometimes landlords engage agents to manage the property. They don't want the hassle, and they'll pay the 8 or 10% or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's a great question. We really think about, the owner and the operator audiences as, similar but different, right? And so a lot of the people that we work with now, just because they're much faster moving, if they're an owner and operator. So, think the smaller company, they may own a couple hundred units, maybe 1,000 units, but they own those units and they operate them themselves. That's their business. Those, landlords tend to be faster to work with because there's just less red tape to get through in terms of launching the product. And so that's kind of been our sweet spot to start. What we're really excited for is launching some major partnerships that we'll kind of announce shortly with some of the largest property management companies in the country. And those are property managers that
My
are
goodness.
operating thousands, tens of thousands of units on behalf of many different owners. And so for us, that's the fastest way to scale. Is you get a couple of these relationships. Now all of a sudden you're holding tens, hundreds of millions of dollars in deposits by working with those few landlords. But we really have built the product to work for the smallest landlord. You own one unit and you live in Massachusetts. You don't want to deal with the process of walking to the bank, physically opening an escrow account every time someone turns over your apartment. And we have a great Whale admin tool for them to self-serve there. To the landlords that are using property management systems like Yardi and Entrata, where we can kind of fully integrate with their API. So they really never have to think about deposit again. The process from collecting and returning is completely automated. It all happens in the background and it's all visible to them in their system. And so we think about those audiences a little bit differently, but we're really trying to solve for both right now.
So you're replacing complexity with simplicity,
Yeah,
and that's
digital
excellent. Yeah.
automation, that
Yeah.
landlords have enough to worry about, whether you're the operator or the owner. They don't
Yeah.
need to deal with this tedious task of making sure that their property is secured against damages.
Great. So, Casey, can you tell me how did you like you've made phenomenal progress in a very specialized but large niche. How did you get as far as you have got to now? Both in terms of, say, funding it and getting it into the market and getting the product built.
Yeah, I mean, our founder Jamie Petraglia has been obviously the driving force behind all of this. He was one of the early leaders at Latch, the kind of smart lock company that really took off in the sector. So he learned a lot about the industry via his experience there, and he actually started a kind of trading company in his early days. He started on the New York Stock Exchange, built an electronic trading platform. So he kind of saw both sides of the kind of financial side and the property side. And that's really kind of what sparked the idea for him. And so he's been the driving force and leveraging a lot of those connections he made at Latch to kind of really get this thing kicked off. And that's kind of where we brought on, great investors like StackPoint Ventures, who's, well known in the space. And we have another big investor that we'll probably announce shortly as well. So a little teaser.
Excellent.
That was a big part of really getting this rolling in the early days. And then I think the thing that's allowed us to continue accelerating so quickly is we've built a phenomenal team. We're a small
Yep.
team, but we have
Yes.
great people, and we've chosen great partners to work with, right? Like Whale's built on a lot of other technologies, and Whale's kind of special sauce is assembling kind of a financial services company, different banking solutions, all the kind of AWS suite, and bringing it all together to create this product. And
Yes.
so, I think
Super.
more so than ever with fintech just, taking off the past, 10 years, it's easier than ever to build products like this that allow us to innovate in the space. Whereas if we had to build Plaid from scratch or the
Yeah.
brokerage API from scratch, so it'd take us 5 years, 10 years, and tens of millions
Yes.
of dollars. And
Yeah.
so we're fortunate that we're launching at the time we are. I think that this has been a ripe opportunity for a long time, but in many ways, the capabilities on the fintech side weren't there until, relatively recently.
And it's easy when you know what you're doing. It can be quite tricky otherwise.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's definitely been a lot for us all to learn on this journey.
Great. Yeah, and then in terms of on the innovation side of it, then like you've alluded to it there, you've used APIs and plugins where you can. You've built your do you have product owners and software developers in house that you can build your own core?
Yeah, yeah, we have a team of engineers, an amazing product designer, a product leader that's driving the roadmap, and like I said, we're still lean, but small mighty teams able to accomplish a lot with the kind of tooling that's out there today on the technology side, and so it's amazing kind of what we've been able to accomplish. I've worked at large companies like Wayfair with 26,000 employees and, started at Wayfair with a couple hundred employees. I've seen kind of how, an innovative company like Wayfair, just gets slowed down by size, right? And the challenges that come with
Yes.
that scale.
Yeah.
It's quite refreshing and exciting to be back at a smaller company where things just go so fast. And there's so much opportunity. Everything you're building is just so critical to the company's success. And that's just a ton of fun to be a part of.
Excellent. And I'm really picking up that vibe as well. I can feel the energy, which is phenomenal. So just then looking forward, what lies in store in the next 12 months, the next 24 months
Yeah,
for
yeah.
Whale?
The core product, Whale Deposit, is, fantastic as it is now, but there's so many other things I think we can do to just make it, an 11-star experience beyond kind of where it is today. And so that'll continue to be kind of the focus as the kind of foundation for Whale. But over the next 12 to 24 months, we'll layer in a couple other products that make Whale even more compelling for renters and landlords. So I kind of mentioned the Whale Grow product, giving renters
Yes.
another way to earn a return on their is another product that we want to bring to the market. And then another one that we're really excited about is a product called Whale Collect. Renters are owe more than their security deposit covers. And for
Yes.
landlords, this is a really challenging thing to go after them. They typically use
Yes.
collections agencies. It hurts the renter's credit. They're really expensive for the landlord. Sometimes they take 30% or more of what they collect. It's really expensive for landlords. And so what we're offering is a significantly cheaper solution for landlords to recover that money by leveraging the existing banking connection we have with the renter and the landlord. We're already connected to both of their accounts as they sign up for Whale. And so we can really ask the resident when they move out, hey, you still owe an extra $174. Why don't you pay for this now? We see you have a balance in either your Whale account or your other linked account. Let's pay this off so you can kind of take care of it, settle up your bill, and not have to worry about it anymore. Don't worry about them coming after after you and hurting your credit. And so that's a really exciting product that we can offer because
Super.
we have that integration. We know what the damages are for. We can
Yes.
message the customer. Whale's coming from such a different, you know, perspective than the
Yeah.
collection agencies, right? Like a collection
Phenomenal.
agency, your first interaction with them is them asking you for money. Well, Whale just got
Yes.
done paying you money for months. We've given you money,
Yes.
we've given you money, given you
Yeah.
money. And now
And
like
now,
we know it's in your
yeah.
best interest to pay this off.
Yeah, and I think you're filling a role of a trusted advisor. You're saying, look, this could go down this way or it could go down this way. We think it's in your benefit to do this because of this and that, and
Right.
that looks like an excellent role as a trusted advisor to somebody, not only saving them money, but their credit rating and maybe their sanity even.
Right. Right. Just making their life a little easier, right? And you kind of asked earlier about, well, do you see Whale becoming a lender? Well, cases like this could be an interesting place for us to step in. Hey, we have insight into your Whale account balance. We know you have this linked account here. If you need help maybe paying off this extra due, can we offer some sort of payment plan for them, so we can make sure the landlord's paid in full right
Yes.
away, which is important to them
Yeah.
for their business. But can we help the renter with those costs? The other thing that I kind of didn't mention that's exciting to see some data come in around is Whale's model. We're seeing people take better care of the units. Normally, with a traditional deposit, you're just handing that money over and you just think it's like paid, right? It's out the door, it's gone. Whereas with Whale, you're constantly reminded each month when you're paid, here's your balance, here's the money you earned on that. Make sure you take good care of the unit so you get all this money back. We're reminding them every single month. Landlords are seeing less damage at the end and they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to take your security deposit. It's a pain for them. They got to hire someone to
Yeah.
come in. It rarely covers the full cost. And so this is another kind of added benefit that we're, been pleasantly surprised by. It's just people
Wonderful.
taking better care of their units.
That's phenomenal. It sounds like I mean, the dynamic that it's introducing now that you've discovered that and you've explained it to me, I can understand it, but I definitely wouldn't have thought it. But it does sound like it is really making a positive impact on that relationship between the renter and the landlord, which is
Right.
priceless.
Typically a contentious point between renter and landlord, right? Like
Yeah,
it's nobody
yeah.
likes security deposit on either side. We're trying to make that an easier, more enjoyable, seamless, renter friendly, landlord friendly solution.
Well, look, thank you so much for joining the podcast here and explaining what you're doing. I really think it's genuinely very exciting. I think it's different. It's big, and I think the way that you're pursuing the opportunity is great. So I'm expecting to hear lots of positive news from where your journey will take you from here. Well
Yeah.
done.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate it. Appreciate the time. This is a lot of fun.
Very, very welcome, Casey. Thanks.